What if they want to lose the war? What if they want the collapse of our entire society? What if they want death, famine, war, and economic collapse to be the new perpetual reality? When I see our genocidal oligarchs like Peter Thiel stuttering to answer a question like whether or not they believe the human race should endure, I see the truth of what we are fighting. It's not just fascism or imperialism or even capitalism. Our enemies have taken the oppressive ideologies of old and mixed them with some form of organized misanthropy. These people don't believe in a future for themselves. They believe in nothing. What we are faced with now is humanity's very first organized movement to push forward the extinction of the entire human race. That's what they want. That is the conclusive result of climate change, of nuclear conflict, of endless war, of famine. This is the only place we can end up. And so we must assume this is their goal. It's extinction. And when you realize that this is an existential threat to our entire species, that we're facing an enemy that isn't just accidentally stumbling upon the consequence of destroying everything, but that they're doing it on purpose because they don't even believe in life, in love, in anything. You realize how urgent this is because this is it. You want to know the truth? I'll tell you the truth. The United States is losing the war in Iran. There are far more U.S. soldiers that have died than the administration is admitting. We're talking, it's in the hundreds. A significant number of U.S. bases across the Gulf nations have not just been damaged, but been functionally destroyed.
In Israel and our U.S. bases, all of our bases have been destroyed. Our harbor installations are destroyed. We're actually having to fall back on India and Indian ports, which are less than ideal. That's what the Navy says. And I think Iran, much to our disappointment, is faring very, very well.
America's radar capacity has been severely hampered. A lot of America's weapons are being wasted on paintings on the ground. And generally speaking, and most importantly, we're on track to completely lose this war. And this loss will not only mean the end of the current administration, it's going to mean the end of the United States empire, it's going to mean the end of the United States, and it's going to mean the end of Israel. Unfortunately, many people in the global south, many people in Western Asia are going to be made to suffer by the tantrums being thrown by these two powers who express their discontent via mass death against typically civilian populations. That will be what we as humanity have to experience, and it's going to be wretched, and that's why we have to be committed in fighting fascism and imperialism. That's why we have to be committed to fighting colonialism and capitalism, okay? We can't skip any of these battles, but it is important to note that what we are watching is the end of this horrifying 500-600 year project. The war with Iran is the death throes of this entire world order. The entire system is coming crashing down. The United States will not survive this war. It will not. I don't think people realize what's coming. And when that collapse happens, whatever shape it takes for the United States, that will mean that Israel will then be isolated because they've burned all their other bridges. And I'm not just talking about military and defense. I'm talking about having any kind of functioning economy. You know, we talk a lot about military conflicts and resistance, but Israel is already in collapse from an economic standpoint because of civilians like you and me engaged in boycotts. Those boycotts and divestment movements have crippled the Israeli economy, and that's why it's completely dependent on the US taxpayer. So once they lose that lifeline, economically and militarily, they will have no capacity to continue existing logistically. This is an existential miscalculation for Israel and the United States. And unfortunately, these are countries that are going to drag a lot of humanity down with them. And it's our responsibility and duty to stand up to that and fight against that as much as we can and ensure humanity survives and a better world survives. And we follow this up by not following the mistakes of the past. But just know right now, I know it's hard reading the news. I know a lot of these things are horrifying and many, many innocent people are going to be hurt and killed by this oppressive Axis movement, the U.S.-Israeli Axis powers. But just know that this is the final act and they are losing. And when they lose this one, it's it. They're over. The U.S. military has already lost 10% of its entire Reaper drone fleet. 10% of the entire fleet, and it's only like 2-3 weeks into the war with Iran. In addition, 40 to 50% of the THAAD interceptor missile defense systems used to shoot down Iranian missiles and drones have also been destroyed by Iranian forces. The United States has failed to communicate or accomplish any military objectives. The only thing U.S.-Israeli forces seem to understand how to do is hit civilian targets, hit civilian infrastructure, inflict as much harm onto civilians as possible, because U.S.-Israeli forces seem to think that video games and war are the same thing, and you're supposed to get like a high kill count or something, and that will decide the war. No! Killing a bunch of civilians does not mean you win a war. That's not how this works. You have to communicate combat objectives and you have to accomplish those combat objectives. But right now, you're not doing anything other than killing civilians and losing massive, massive parts of your military infrastructure and taking missile assets and military assets away from other conflict zones to further bolster forces fighting Iran that are losing and losing badly. Why do you think they're disassembling missile defense systems by South Korea and bringing them to the Middle East? It's because Iran is winning. Iran is doing incredible damage to the U.S.-Israeli military infrastructure, and now the U.S. military has no idea what to do because they're being led by fools.
Iran has destroyed 5 radars. There's 2 types. One's called an AN-TPY, and the other's an AN-FPS. One of them costs $500 million. The other 2 each cost $1 billion.
Wow.
Yeah, these are big-time radars. They were located at our military base in Al Udeid, at the naval base in Bahrain, all of which have been bombed, attacked. The Bahrain facility is essentially destroyed. And those radars were critical for our whole air defense system, because they would provide the immediate warning that, oh, there's been a missile launch, it's going on this trajectory, this is where you need to be prepared to engage it. It was tied into what was called a terrain high altitude area defense weapon, THAAD, T-H-A-A-D. Well, we have like a total of 10 THAAD batteries in the world. Iran has destroyed 3 of those. 30% of our total number of THAADs in the world, Iran's destroyed 3 of those in this last week. They've destroyed about $4 billion worth of radars in a week. And they are now, they've been regularly hitting Israel despite our claims that we've blown up their launchers. We continue to think that we can solve these problems with force instead of diplomacy.
The United States is running out of ammunition. They have limited, hard-to-replace stockpiles of high-end missile interceptors like the THAAD and the SM-3. And in the last war, last year, it's estimated the United States used around 30% of their interceptor missiles, which means if they're firing at the same rate as they were before, in about 4 or 5 weeks, they will be out of half of their ammunition. And this is not a kind of missile that they can just buy a bunch more of. It takes years to rebuild this stockpile. Iran knows this, so they're turning this into a race of attrition and using cheap, abundant drones that just cost, 20 to 50K each, which they can just use to completely outpace these very expensive and very limited interceptors that the United States needs, not just in this theater, but many other theaters around the world for its world domination desires. So basically, the United States is using up all of its special interceptor missiles that it will take years and years to replace in a matter of days. I think folks are starting to realize that the United States military is actually extremely weak, that using maximum austerity measures and cutting social services and dumping all of that money into the military to have these fancy toys and extremely highly technological weapon systems was actually a losing strategy. It does not mean you are the most powerful military in the history of the human race. It actually means that you don't know how to proportion out where those funds should go. And it actually means that you can't defeat an army that's throwing $20,000 to $50,000 drones at you, and your $50 million weapon defense systems can't shoot them down. What we have seen in the last 2 weeks is that this post-9/11 world order lie, that the United States military is the most powerful thing that there's ever been and no one could survive going against it, was indeed a lie. The United States military, and the Israeli military by that extension, are run by spoiled little brats that cannot fight in a fair fight, and the only thing they know how to do is push a button and blow up a farmer 1,000 miles away with a missile. If whatever they're doing isn't that, then they're not going to win.
Would you imagine what it would be like when we are conscious rebellions, when we consciously organize to rebel in Los Angeles with reason? I mean, making supply lines, making sure ambulances are there, having hospital aids, having fire brigades, just like they do even in Ireland. Nothing big, just a little planning.